Hello and welcome to a special edition of The World This Week, The World This Year. 4 guests, 1 hour, 365 days, The World This Year, where we're joined by Christopher Dickey of Newsweek and The Daily Beast. How are you, sir?
Very good.
Also with us, Aude Baron of I always get this wrong, Le Plus Nouvel Obs, Nouvel Observateur. We know one of the leading news weekly magazines in France. What does Le Plus do?
Well, Le Plus is a part of debate on the internet. So basically, people who can be experts or citizens can write what they think about the news.
All right. Also with us is Patrick Smith of the Africa Report, which is now
monthly.
Yep.
From
soon. In 2012, will it be weekly?
We're hoping to go daily and then start a TV station.
Okay. And then Stephen Erlinger of the New York Times, thanks for being with us. It'll take a while for the dust to truly settle on 2011, the year when out of the blue, strongmen whose reigns seemed as eternal as the pyramids suddenly found themselves, well, overrun. Now, we don't know the outcome to the Arab Spring, but we know that what literally sparked it was a lone, desperate act in a provincial town, the self-immolation of a Tunisian street vendor fed up with being shaken down by the cops. The rest, as they say, is history.
أيها الشعب التونسي كلمكم اليوم
كل هذه الكتابات أنا أنكرها كاملة.
Christopher Dickey, I guess anybody who said they could have predicted all of this is a liar, basically.
Yes, because nobody did. Nobody had the slightest idea that things were going to blow up in the Arab world the way they did, that you'd see the complete revolutionary wave sweeping through the entire region. It's not just, of course, that you had several dictators fall. It's that we're still in the process of watching several more of them falling, and nobody could have predicted that.
The interesting thing was how it all began in Tunisia, and it just sort of spread like wildfire, Stephen Erlinger.
Well, it did. It always takes a spark, but all over the Arab world, and the Arab Development Report had made this very clear, there was a large demographic chunk of young people who were well educated, much better educated than their parents, who didn't have jobs, who were angry, who were in touch with the internet and the rest of the world. And this was the hay that caught on fire. And quite rightly, they wanted mastery over their lives, some sense of control over their own governments, and jobs. And it's a very, everyone knew this demographic lump would make a difference. Nobody was quite sure when or what would happen. And now what we see is quite a lot of differentiation among countries, and quite a lot of chaos. Some will do better than others. I think Tunisia, which started it, will come out very, very well. Libya's a complete chaos, and Syria is very dangerous, and it's very serious, and it's very bloody, and the world doesn't know what to do.
How long, Patrick, did you get a sense that people finally started to get out of the mind frame of references to 1979, when it was the Iranian Revolution, still stuck in the old Cold War paradigms of what the Arab world looks like?
Well, I think it was pretty quick, because contrary to what the bank, or institutions like the World Bank and the IMF were saying, it showed the reality on the ground. People moved very, very quickly to protest, and if you read the IMF and the World Bank reports and even the State Department reports, there was a belief that somehow the Mubarak model and the Ben Ali model was sustainable. And as has been said, there's this huge gulf between the young people of North Africa and the wider Arab world and the establishment, the reality on the ground. And I think that's become the dominant narrative, the youthful revolutionary narrative. And it's done two things. I think it's combated the sort of the military compact that you've seen in places like Egypt since '52, the Free Officers' Revolution and so on, where a military regime could come in and take the nationalist garb and represent itself as a savior of the country. And that's over. And I think that has huge indirect effects across the world, not just in the Middle East and Africa, but in Asia too. And then Ben Ali's own mantle, the sort of efficient authoritarianism, that too has been trashed. And I think that has implications, particularly in Asia, where there's a sort of bargain. The bargain that Ben Ali made with the Tunisians was, I may be repressing you, but I'm creating an efficient economy, and sooner or later the advantages are going to get down even to the south, places like Sidi Bouzid. That didn't happen, and it's quite clear that the bargain was a totally corrupt bargain. The system in Tunisia was totally dysfunctional, and that model is no longer accepted. And I think that's inspired a lot of young people, a lot of new political movements. We don't know how it's going to play out, but that's right across the world. In Eastern Europe, in Western Europe, and in Asia and Latin America, I think you're seeing a much greater skepticism of the establishment across the world as a result of this. So I think it's entirely different from '79.
Now, there is a prelude to all of this. In 2008, there had been bread riots in the Arab world. The difference today, though, and Aude Baron will agree with this, is smartphones and social networks. On January 26, a young Egyptian executive for Google got into a lot of trouble for tweeting this. I said 1 year ago that the internet will change the political scene in Egypt, and some friends made fun of me. While Ghanim went to jail for that, and that helped fuel the anger. It was a surprise twist.
Well, actually, the movement on the internet is interesting because it was a new way of communicating. And when you have that kind of demonstration, you need the media to highlight the movement so that, people all around the world can talk about it. And through this new way of communication, the media could talk on the one way of the reason of the movement and on the other way on the mean of communication. So the media were very strong and were focusing on the movement. So for people it was very encouraging to keep going on and to see that all the bloggers with all the news, bloggers were being put in jail and people were getting even more anger. So it was kind of a
Are we, though, reading too much into this? Because we're seeing it through Western eyes. And is it just, in the case of Egypt, the same secular elite that's using Twitter, for instance, and speaking to each other, and that perhaps Egypt, a country of 85 million, is not on Twitter?
Well, Twitter and Facebook are a way of communication. It's not the reason, it's not the basis of the revolution, but it helped a lot of people to, to being informed.
Al-Shabaab is on Twitter.
Well, yes, and so is the Kenyan general who's just sent troops into Somalia. But I think that when we discuss this, we tend to leave out what is actually the two most important elements in these revolutions are not Twitter and Facebook, or even the internet as such. The internet is a way of getting images out to the world. The important thing in all these revolutions is that satellite television picked up those images and broadcast them back. And while people are not necessarily plugged in to the internet in a lot of these countries, they have cell phones to get the image out, and they have satellite dishes to see the image rebroadcast. And that's where you really get the dynamic going. So I think actually France 24 is probably just as revolutionary a force as Twitter.
Oh, that's interesting to note. By the way, it's not always been a leaderless revolution. In Libya, we've seen a few well-known faces, for instance, help tip the scales.
Vive Benghazi! Vive la Libye! Vive l'amitié entre la France et la Libye!
All right, and by the way, David Cameron was there with Nicolas Sarkozy in Benghazi. There was Western intervention. It wasn't all. It wasn't.
Libya would not have happened without NATO and the West. I mean, Gaddafi would have won. It's clear. We created this victory. We didn't start the revolution, but we finished it. I mean, this was meddling of the highest order. Now, maybe it was meddling for a good reason.
And why?
Why? Because ask different countries. I mean, I think Sarkozy had a mixture of sincerity, because Benghazi was about to get clobbered, and opportunism, because his government had screwed up Tunisia. He had to fire his foreign minister, and he was embarrassed by the Gaddafi visit early in his first term, and he knows the French like to lead the world in something that can be called a moral crusade. Crusade's maybe not the best word. So opportunism, definitely, but also political shrewdness. And, you know, frankly, the Americans were pulled along. Nobody liked Gaddafi. The most interesting thing to me was why the Arab League supported intervention for the first time. One was Qatar, and one was simply Gaddafi had alienated all of them.
Well, he tried to assassinate the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. That sort of turns them against him.
I know, that's...
Irritating.
It's bound, yes, it is irritating.
I mean, I spent a fair bit of time in Tripoli talking to people who were involved in the rebellion, and what was really interesting was the level to which ordinary people, teachers, pharmacists, taxi drivers, got involved in this popular revolt. It hasn't been told yet, but in places like Sukul Juma, the big suburb in Tripoli, people were going out making pipe bombs, throwing them at contingents of Gaddafi's forces. They were digging trenches to trap tanks in. I think, I mean, I agree with what you're saying about the decisive nature of the aerial bombardment of the West, but also I fear what would have happened it would be more like Syria. It would just, I don't think Gaddafi would have won, but it would have gone on and it would have got bloodier and bloodier, and maybe other countries would have got involved, perhaps Tunisia, perhaps Egypt. It would have, many more people would have died, but I think after the threats on Benghazi and how Gaddafi was dealing with the opposition, I think the die was cast pretty early on, and it was very smart of Sarkozy and Cameron to move quickly to claim the high ground on this one.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I think the problem was they didn't move quickly enough. There was a moment when, in fact, the rebels had taken almost everything except Tripoli, and if they had moved then, it would have been a much shorter operation. But I would take exception to something, or just to remind Steve of something, which is that foreign intervention and revolutions isn't necessarily the thing that everybody remembers. The United States, as I recall, had some help from the French, and in fact could never have won its revolution against the British if it were not for French intervention. So it seems to me that to say that this would not have happened without the intervention, I think is wrong. Well, it would have been much more difficult.
Argue a hypothetical, but the Gaddafi forces were on the edge of Benghazi. They'd taken back everything. I think it was going to be over. Now, there might have been an underground rebellion for quite a long time, but had he been able to use his tanks, had he been able to use his planes, had he been able to do what he wanted, this would not have happened. I mean, just as the Kosovars would not have won against Serbia without NATO.
And the Americans would not have won against Britain.
Well, yeah, but that's fine. And, you know, and
I mean, it's kind of conventional, in fact.
And history of Brittany would be different. You know, that's really not the point. My point is, 21st century, what is the role of the West in this Arab awakening, which is really what we're discussing. And the big question to me is, there are people, very interesting people, who have started this revolution, but it's becoming quite clear all over the region that they're not the ones benefiting from it, and they're not the ones emerging victorious. Now, the people who are emerging may be perfectly nice, reasonable people, but they're of a very different kind, and we don't know that much about them.
All right, that's still a work in progress, and it gets back to what Patrick was saying about how it could have been a slow burn in Libya. In Syria, certainly in 2011, that was the case. A divided Syrian opposition still hadn't figured out, to come the end of the year, a way to make the Assads, who'd been in charge for decades, understand that they'd outlasted their welcome.
My forces, they are military forces, belong to the government.
Okay, but you're the
I don't
government.
own them. I'm president.
Okay.
I don't own the country, so they're not
No,
my
but
forces.
you have to give the order.
No.
Not by your command?
No.
The crackdown was without your permission?
So there's a difference between having policy to crack down and between having some mistakes committed by some officials. There's a big difference.
The cartoonist who was critical of you, I've seen his pictures, his hands were broken, he was beaten.
Many people criticized me. Did they kill all of them? Who killed who? Most of the people that are being killed are supporters of the government.
What's amazing about is we're getting these images every single day out of Syria.
Well, what's dramatic is in Syria we have images, but we don't have many economic interests, seeing from the Western view. So we don't have many way of pressure and what can we do? Because we could say, okay, we make an embargo, but what do we buy with Syria? So it's quite difficult, and there's a big battle on the internet to try to interest the audience, the public, to this cause. And it's some images are very, very violent, and you see, you know, with blood. And in the media, well, we journalists, we just get images that, and many of them we just can't show them to the people, because when you see, you know, bleeding people, it just, you know, it's too violent. Even if you, after you have a question, you say, do we have to show?
And also people feel, don't they also still feel intimidated when they see this huge mass of amateur video footage of where do you start? How do you sift through it?
Well, first, for us journalists, there's a big question: are those videos authentic or not? And there's, you know, a big work, because when you see so many videos on YouTube, you just have to make a test. You type on YouTube Syria, and you will see so many videos. But which one are true, which one aren't? And we were talking about France 24 and the website, The Observers. They make really great work, and they help in France, you know, to see which video are real or not.
And in English and in Arabic. Give our viewer a tip. What would be the way, if you want to be informed about Syria and you want to go to the internet, what do? What's the best way to go about it?
First, well, my advice would be to go on the mainstream media, because if you don't have the keys to understand videos, if you don't have the keys to identify videos, you know, you can make big mistakes. So maybe you have to focus on some bloggers who have contacts in the countries, and maybe you have to follow journalists and medias who have reporters in the countries, and there you can get informed. Otherwise, you know, if you just go by yourself on YouTube or on other websites, you will just get lost.
All right, and when we come back with the special year-end edition of The World This Year, we'll take a look at how Europe fared. Stay with us.